Donc on va poursuivre les échanges en écoutant différents témoignages.
Well, we're going to continue like this. I think the transition is going to be fairly swift, I believe. Well, given what Clémentine said, we have a fairly concrete example which can be done in production. Well, we've got production and processing here. This is 𝗕𝗁𝗇. Perhaps Cécile could explain to us what's being done in the 𝗕𝗁𝗇 group to work on the questions of biodiversity, looking at the value chain, etc. Have we got the next slideshow? We'll get an example of this is a clear example from the group. Ceci Aidan, I am responsible for the herbier and sustainable sourcing of our ingredients in 𝗕𝗁𝗇, which is linked to plants in Brittany for the 𝗕𝗁𝗇 group, obviously. I'm going to tell you a little about why and where. We'll give you some examples.
Très rapidement, juste pour dire que...
Well, briefly then, we produce cosmetics, of course. We're naturally effective, very committed, and that since 1959. So we've been working since 2009, really focusing on the relationship between men and women and nature. You've got the 4 different branches and brands of Yves Rocher, and here what's important is the internalization of the value chain from the plant right up to the pot of cosmetics that you buy. You can see we plant, we cultivate, we innovate, we produce. And the roots of the 𝗕𝗁𝗇 group are à La Gacilly in Brittany. We have a botanic garden, which is really a real example of the engagement, the implication of the group in terms of biodiversity, production of plants in organic fashion, an agroecological system. You can see the different branches which are certified, UEBT, Union for Ethical Biotrade, in La Gacilly. This is really our lab as well, our experimental playground, where we try and face all the different crises, the ecological and environmental ones, which seem to occur on a daily basis today. I put this up here so that you could have an insight into all of our CSR policies, the real commitments of the group. We are arguing for a more responsible consumption, reduce our impact on the value chain, and that means working on carbon, water, plastic, and biodiversity, clearly. Biodiversity is wearing the hats to the rest of it, obviously, they're all linked. And then we also have to make sure that our teams and our employees and colleagues are on board. Now, more specifically with biodiversity, I've given you some figures, but we've already talked about them, or Philippe has anyway. You've got 30% of birds that have disappeared from an agricultural environment between 1989 and 2018. That's an example. It's more than the disappearance of these species. We're talking more about the fragilization of these food chains as well. And humans are behind this. The main reason is the destruction of natural habitats, and we're suffering. We are feeling the consequences when it comes to agricultural production. You heard about it, and I think in the last presentation, all the different consequences when we've got pests and illness and disease, etc. But we're a player in all of that. We've been complicit through the agricultural practices But we want to promote different kinds of practices through our purchasing policy as well. So we have the means of acting, even at our level, means of making a difference. Biodiversity is a fairly old concept for us, but we're constantly restructuring it. And this began in 2010, and over the course of time it developed. And then in 2024, we rewrote the policy in order to make sure that we had a policy which really reflected all of our commitments. Now, we saw this through a manifesto, which I'm not going to read out to you, but what you should keep, these are your take-home messages. It's the first sentence written in bold. What's important for us, when we talk about really making sure we can restore the living chain, the idea behind that is that within our value chain, when it's production, purchasing plants, producing cosmetics, purchasing any ingredients for cosmetics, the way we look at formula, the way we produce them, right up to the end user, we make sure that all of these questions are linked to biodiversity in-house. We examine our approach to offer credible diversity, and that's something that is dear to our heart in our modus operandi. The three major elements on which we work are in front of you. You've got supply, responsible supply, and responsible products, and the virtuous management of our sites. This is where we can really have a massive impact, if we respect all of this, on the living organisms. In the cosmetic formula, we can differentiate the different components and the raw materials, which we call functional, which do the rest of the job. We have a different approach and a level of expectation depending on the matter. We can go further or not, depending on the added value and the proximity that we might have with the agricultural world in this field. Everything begins with traceability. You have to, it's key. This is not linked to biodiversity, but you have to know the origin, because if you have doubts on the traceability, you don't really know what you're talking about, and you have then no way of assuring that this is encouraging biodiversity. So this is the starting point. Look at the level of impact of your raw materials, look at the traceability, and see what can be done. And if the case arises, be able to change your raw materials and purchase elsewhere. So we're not looking about replacing any kind of material which is brought in from far away with something that's close at hand if we can't look at traceability and we can't confirm it. Now look at this pyramid. You can see this is basically our source, how we source ingredients. Up at the top, you have the gold components using our given territory in the 𝗥𝗍𝗄𝗏 to see just how far we can push the model in one particular type of agriculture, hand in hand with the biodiversity, with the territory, with the region. To see if we can go up a threshold and demand more. We're always trying to demand more of ourselves. There's agroecology, another definition. But we're looking really at organic farming objectives, anything that can help produce the health of the ecosystems, the soil, and humans. And then we talk about agroecology, this very comprehensive systemic approach, this very particular attention to diversity that counts and to the region in which we live. That's what we're looking for in 𝗥𝗍𝗄𝗏. If I look in a more global fashion, if I look at sustainable sourcing and all the different actions you can take, we would like to contribute to developing sourcing or sustainable supply chains. We want to be an example. We want to be able to illustrate what we can expect from our other branches. And this we're going to start in 𝗥𝗍𝗄𝗏 and try and get everybody else on board. We have to be able to address the risks. We've got a criteria linked to biodiversity. You can see some here. I'm not talking about elements linked to human rights or social risks. we cannot remain, we must constantly remain attached to any commitment we've made to encouraging biodiversity. And it all depends on the time we have. If you look at concrete examples, what's done in 𝗥𝗍𝗄𝗧, we have, what would we trying to do? We're trying to reintroduce this kind of bocage, very marshy, pretty green land. I'm talking about a label which is going to guarantee this bocage. We're trying to inspire a collective dynamic to work on economic model, as we had this morning, which should be complementary to agricultural productions. When you look at managing, when you're cutting trees, trimming trees, etc., it's the same kind of commitment with the hedges. You have to make sure that we're respecting, this is the cornerstone of ecology, respecting the cuts when, where, and why. We'll look at different indicators for biodiversity, and the idea is to go beyond this IAEs and cultural beliefs. We have to go beyond that and say, how can we go right up to the state indicators for biodiversity in order to measure and make a correlation between the practices. And what we've seen when it comes to biodiversity, when we use existing protocol, is that the easiest ones to use are on the farm. And what we have to do is set the cursor, say the relationship between what you can do and have protocols in place which are easy and can be rolled out very easily. I might stop there. No, apparently I can go on. I'm going to talk about a second example. I was talking about relocation when we talked about sourcing. Our entrance into relocation, because of course we want to reduce distance and master our value chains, and we can do this. We talked about the internalization of what we do. We really go from producing the plant to producing the pot of cosmetics in 𝗥𝗍𝗄𝗧. And we want to use this example in order to extrapolate in a more global fashion the plants used for cosmetics, which are sourced internationally, and perhaps it would be judicious to relocate them to Brittany or to countries which at least border France, and see that we can really have a hand on the plants. What are the risks with climate change and the erosion of biodiversity? We have some emblematic plants that we use today in cosmetics, and we are very unsure of being able to use them in the 5, 10, 15 years in front of us. So we need to really start looking for an alternative now, looking for at what we put in place in 𝗥𝗍𝗄𝗧 in order to experiment.
So to conclude, we're trying to work as a network with the networks from Brittany at the technical and scientific levels, of course, working on these topics as well. We also work through exchanges of ideas and research. I would be delighted to talk more about this during the discussion. We're trying to fuel our company strategy to see how in the future we can keep producing our plants and make cosmetics given the fast-changing conditions that we're working in. Thank you, Cécile. We're going to keep talking about assessment, photography, or image taking. And I will ask Marie from Biosphere, who's observing companies working in the field of map and cosmetics. How do these farms producing cosmetic plants, are they more virtuous or less virtuous? As a technician overlooking such farms, Is there something specific about those map farms? Good afternoon, I am Marie-Androuin. I also work with Clémentine at Biosphere. I do training and consulting for great accounts. I work on maps and also tree growing. I'm more focused on tree growing, but I also work on 𝗵𝗶𝗶𝗍𝗏, sylvestris, and others. I wouldn't say there is one specificity to this sector. I think all sectors are faced with a decrease in biodiversity and various challenges in parallel. I'm here to work with farms to provide them with diagnosis of their situation. We start talking with the producer, asking them what they want from in terms of biodiversity and what they want to work on. The soil, the plants, the landscape, their water management. We won't work with them the same way depending on what they want to work on. With Antoine, for instance, we really targeted a specific plan over 5 to 10 years. In maps, it depends if you're working with perennial or annual plants. If you're working with annual plants, we can work on your rotation, diversification, intercrop, we can have many levers. It's not only about trees and bird nests. There's also a lot in the soil. We talked about fungi, bacteria, nematodes are also great indicators for biodiversity. Your farming practices will bring a lot, and you can work with 𝗕𝗏𝗇, which is a lab. They're very interesting to work with regarding the soil analysis. I don't want to take all the discussion, so we'll have time to get back to me. Thank you. Let's keep talking about measurements. I think someone talked about metrics. I would like to give the mic to François, who produces maps. He can tell us about the biodiversity score, which is one indicator giving us an objective measurement of biodiversity. What is the biodiversity score? I wanted to tell you that if I'm here today, it's because of thanks to you, because I joined the sector about 15 years ago, and for the first 5 years, I was very angry at everything living, because I took over my father's farm, and the weeds were my enemy, and I thought they were so resilient. After 6 years, they became my friend, and now I have about 50% of human friends and 50% of non-human friends. With other agronomist engineers, we changed our approach with a completely innovative way of seeing things. If you spend your days in the fields all day long, you have to change your vision. I'm going to talk to you about the miracle of complexity. If you understand what I'm saying, it's because you have billions of neurons in your wooden head, and they're connected by billions of connections. This is what gives you awareness and makes you able of understanding the meaning of what I'm saying. There we go. For a landscape, it's exactly the same. I'm going to tell you about how clever your landscape is to connect with what Clémentine was saying. I don't know how to shift slides. Yes. The key to the living is this mosaic. You have 3 neurons on the right. It's not a very clever landscape, not a lot of neurons. The more intricate your landscape, the more connection you will have, and the more reflection you can have. When I said primary reflection, I mean that strongly divided parcels can become organized in a complex way. Biodiversity score is a measurement of combination between all living things on a parcel with 3 criteria. I will not tell you too much because I want to move on to the scan afterwards. It's a measurement of connections between living things, a number of species per infrastructure, number of parcels per infrastructure and the way they're disseminated, and total number of infrastructure on the farm. And the results that we came up with, mathematicians and engineers, it's a multiplication. And the more complex, the higher your score. You start with 0.1. Biode is our measurement unit. It will tell you the level of complexity of your farm. If you're up to 15,000, it's the forest gardens in the Kerala region in India, so top complexity. But here we start with 100 hectares of wheat, and we finish with the one with 150 species. So on your farm, this is what it looks like. On the left-hand side, this is the potential to create biodiversity. Either you compare with your sector or with your region, or you have several reference groups that you can compare yourself to. And on the thermometer, you can see where you stand. Are you accelerating your biodiversity or are you degrading your biodiversity? And on the right-hand side, the star graph is showing the various components, what Clémentine told you about, especially regarding agroecological infrastructure, the dissemination of parcels, and so on. This is a scan of your sector. You have 23 farms that are not fully specialized in maps. The biodiversity score has scanned about 300 farms in 3 years. And this scan can operate on any type of farm anywhere around the world. Here you have 23 farms set in France in 2023. And I put them on this graph from the least complex to the most complex. And you can see that it's exponential. Number 23 has a score that's pretty high. How can you explain such a result? We are looking into 3 criteria, 3 main criteria. For instance, one of the key elements is the percentage of agroecological structures on the surface, because that's where the neurons happen. When you cultivate on your farm, this is where the system becomes more complex. And number 23 is not the highest in percentage of infrastructure surface. But number 1 is the one with the least IA, about 5% of agroecological infrastructure, AEI. And then the size of parcels, it's a strongly controversial element. The Synabio, the processing union, said that it should be between 4 and 6 hectares. If you're mechanized, it's not easy to be under 4 hectares. Number 23 has very small parcels, and number 1 has large parcels. But in the middle, you have a red dot, which is number 18. He's got large parcels, but he's doing pretty well in this scale. So, and the last criterion, the percentage of soil coverage. No matter what your production is, if you stop cultivating, the interaction between roots and microorganisms stops, and that can be a problem. Here, the logarithmic results is the first graph, that's been set on a linear graph. Number 1 is, well, under the red line, it's about destructing the living things. Between 1 and 10, it's maintaining. between 10 and 100, you're restoring it, and over 100, you're accelerating the biodiversity. And you're bringing back circularity in the living system. This is a beautiful image. It's a spice production company. They started on this mountain that was fully bare, and they did this, and then they checked with our scoring the level of complexity. And they're going to scan again every 5 years to check their level of biodiversity. And we want to develop this scoring all around the world. And so biodiscore measures the level of intelligence of your system. It doesn't look into detail with just the scan. Once you have our scoring, go and see Biosphere and such people because they can adapt all this between Brittany and Madagascar. They can adapt. Our tool is free. You just need to become a member of the association. So see you soon. Thank you, François. Let's keep talking around the table. Leave the floor to Benjamin. I assume you all know him. He's looking into cultivation technical management. How do you take into account or not the biodiversity issue in projects that you do in the iteipmai? Biodiversity is not always mentioned. We don't always use the word in every research that we carry out. Still, it's everywhere, under different forms. In some projects, it's particularly clear we're focusing on this for auxiliary studies, for instance. But in any project, we have a component around biodiversity, whether it's one of the three, genetic biodiversity, as we saw, it's key in our sector. We have a strong component of variety creation and design. We also work with our conservatory partner. We are working on biodiversity to create new variety and to meet with different challenges. It can be about yield, it can be about pests, about resistance to pathogens, adaptation to climate. So all this is, and if the genetic diversity is not there, we do polycrossing to create new varieties to increase our selection programs. And then you have the species biodiversity. The species biodiversity has been said before. We have about 120 cultivated or grown plants. So biodiversity is very important in our studies. It's very rare to have a farm that only grows one plant. So in our parcels and in the sector in general, we have a diversity. And at the iteipmai, we also want to meet with the new challenges, creating new markets, for instance. So looking into new species to grow. At first, we do trials, and then we see if it works, we do them. And then the adapting to climate change, of course, it's a key challenge, and we want to adapt our methods and our varieties to be resilient faced with these challenges. So there's the genetics, but also climate change enabling us to bring in new species that could not be grown in continental, inland France. And now we can look into those species. We have an IDEX program working with the Chamber of Agriculture to grow cumin or Moroccan plants. It can open new markets for our producers. And last but not least, the ecosystem biodiversity. This is in which we have the highest number of studies. For instance, we have �11 for the hop sector. We are looking at pests management, various aphids and so on. And we're looking at the various auxiliaries that are found in parcels and see how they can be promoted through a cover crop or whatever supports them. And then we have all the other projects, 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝗹𝗶𝗵𝗏, 𝗕𝗲𝗵𝗵 for agroforestry that are looking at shading versus climate change. And those studies are looking at more complex systems by adding trees in the systems. And that includes the appearance of new auxiliaries. So we're changing the environment, so we're changing the life in our parcels. In agrivoltaicism, it's a bit different because instinctively we wouldn't think that bringing in concrete would actually increase the biodiversity, but it can actually shelter new species. So in every project, we don't systematically keep a close eye on biodiversity, but they all revolve more or less directly around biodiversity. And when we're looking at weed management, for instance, it's always there. Biodiversity is always there. And we could also imagine using biodiversity or other measurements in every project. Even if it's not the main focus of the study, it could always be a plus. And to conclude, we talked about biodiversity in the soil because it's what we don't see. Soil is not just to keep a hold on the stalk and the roots. There's a whole living system in the soil. And it's important for plants to have what they produce in them. And the soil is really key to work on. So looking at production, we're going to shift to the other side of the value chain. And I will ask now Stéphanie from 𝗵𝗶𝗶𝗍, the Federation of Beauty Company and Cosmetics Company. What do beauty companies think of this biodiversity issue? How do they take it into account? Because they're the ones giving value at the end of the value chain to our products. Well, I will try to add to what's been said and not just repeat everything. The FABA is the Beauty Companies Federation, about 150 companies of the sector, from some very big companies and some SMEs and very small companies. One of the specificities of our sector is that we're lucky to have the entire value chain in France. Production, ingredients, packaging, everything. We're among the leaders in the world leaders in this sector, and so we have a strong support of responsible purchasing policies to really bring up the entire sector. We also have packaging and water, which is a key issue, especially since the drought of 2022. So it's fully acknowledged that biodiversity is absolutely key. cosmetics have an impact on biodiversity like any human activity, unfortunately. However, it is strongly dependent on nature and plant-based resources. So our companies are investing and strongly looking into those issues. In terms of methods, what's difficult with biodiversity is that it's not that easy to measure within a company. You can count the cubic meters you use of water and so on. So on a parcel or a farm, you can have data, but at a macro level for one company, it's very difficult to have the company. It's very difficult. So what we're saying at the federation level is that it's not a problem. We need to evolve in terms of knowledge and biodiversity, but we can't get stuck by fear of harming biodiversity. We have to take actions. We have to be more responsible in our purchasing departments. We have to contribute to better practices in terms of agroecology. Whether we can measure the impact of our good practices is not the issue. We have to implement good practices. And there are two directions that have already been mentioned. I'll try not to repeat what Cécile said. We have functional ingredients. That is great farms with maize, colza, palm oil, cocoa, and so on, coconuts. Cosmetics use a lot of these products that are also used in the agro-food industry and biofuels. So cosmetics in all that has really a tiny impact because it's much smaller. But how can we have collective solutions so that altogether we can have an impact on such raw materials? The FIBEA, the Federation, has written a white paper on glycerin and how to be more responsible around glycerin. So we are looking towards the farming industry, of course, and we are looking at the active ingredients, what we're here for today, MAPs, so the perfume plants. And here what's at stake is different. Our environmental footprint, and when we think in terms of biodiversity, these plants don't have a great impact, but they are very important to our products. They're at the heart of our marketing. Perfume plants are absolutely essential in our product range, of course, and we've worked on that for a long time, all companies included. They have an impact on landscape, on the social vision, and the brand image. And we can actually integrate biodiversity in our practices, and we can become involved in local projects and promote agroecology and healthy practices and best practices. And to conclude, this is why our federation was involved in the interprofession union that was created and was presented to you this morning, because we strongly believe that it's important to consolidate our partnerships. Thank you for sharing about this part of the value chain. But a question to you all, is there a will to take it further at the communication level to promote products that use raw materials from more sustainable and ecological productions? Could we take it further? It's not easy to communicate to the end consumer because even among professionals, it's not always easy to take it to the same level. It's nice to tell beautiful stories that have great meaning, but will they, if we want to take everything into details to really be truthful, then a single website will not be enough because it's so complex. There's not much space around our products to communicate, and the expectations from consumers are, let's say, we can say that we work with natural products, or we can use such lingo, but it can't be much more than that. In terms of overall corporate communication, we can take it further. We can communicate on our commitments, and beyond communication, it's about raising awareness, networking within the cosmetic industry, so that we can communicate together and take it our message further. So it's more than just product marketing and communication. Listening to you, Clémentine, Marine, François, and also Cécile, actually, you have an assessment of biodiversity on a parcel. Today, can you measure the beneficial impact of biodiversity? That is to say, to take things one step further, do you just take a snapshot and look at a given moment to assess biodiversity at that moment? Or do you try to have a more dynamic view to assess mid-term and long-term impacts of biodiversity? Briefly, when we bring in new practices, it's hard to quantify the benefits, the advantages. Because what we're looking at in terms of, for example, auxiliaries versus pests, it's so multifactorial. There are so many elements entering the equation. There are indirect factors as well, so it's very hard. There's a large study that was published by INRA in May, I think, that really brings the connection between practices and positive impact. So we can trust such studies to say that, yes, even if you can't measure it with facts and figures, when looking at one factor, overall, using agroecological practices has a positive impact on biodiversity. And actually, I have feedbacks from farmers. So it's not a scientific study, but they can see the level of pollination increasing after they've planted hedges, for instance. We have the photosynthetic potential of plants to observe the strength and photosynthesis capacity of plants on a parcel. We can see that if we increase the organic matter level, we increase a lot of chemical and physical factors, so it boosts the activity of the plant. And via satellite, we can actually observe that the photosynthesis increases when there is more biodiversity promotion practiced on a parcel. And I would like to add that what we have is the human vision. Ask a plant or a worm how they feel when it's a complex system, when they have more neighbors. You have to trust the living. If you put in place everything necessary, biodiversity will work itself out. But it takes time. For instance, I had a farmer that had done something great, but within a highly deforested area. And someone came to see him saying, "Oh, your biodiversity is very low, it's bad." And it was cruel because compared to what was around him, he was great. Another farmer had a great level of biodiversity, but he was surrounded by forests and woods. So, of course, it was the environment that supported his biodiversity, not his practices. So there's a difference between what farmers are doing, flowered strips and so on, and in the media, you can see great projects in Africa, such great group of cosmetics that used a lot of money to really recreate one oasis in the middle of the desert. But seen from the sky, you can't see it from a satellite. So you need to find a contractual chain system from the sourcing chain to really make it full of best practices so that it leads to more biodiversity. And time is running out, so it's time for questions now. Do you have questions for our speakers?
J'avais une petite question facile. C'était plutôt.
I have an easy question for Clémentine. Biodiversity is also pests. Because you didn't talk about it in your categories. They can be auxiliaries for other crops and so on. It's all intricated. So how do you organize your farm? At the scale we're working at, how do you promote biodiversity without promoting pests? Because there are auxiliaries you can promote, but how do you make sure you promote what you want and not what you don't want? Of course, it's a very anthropic vision. There are pests and auxiliaries, but how do you control that? Well, the point is to have the most resilient environment possible with trophic chains that are balanced. Maybe we'll always have a level of pests, but maintaining flourishing biodiversity with a lot of auxiliary, it will make sure that every population is kept at a sustainable level. So there will not be a booming or an explosion of such or such species. And that's what agroecology is about. We don't want to get rid of every pest. We want to make sure that they remain at a controlled level, and therefore their impact on the crop is as little as possible. I don't know if I answered your question.
Benoît?
Well, there's a question for Benoît. For Cécile, oh no, it's from Benoît for Cécile. In our slide, you talked about sustainable picking and gathering. What are the group's levers when it comes to picking and collecting? We talked about crops and improving the biodiversity, but you really have to talk about people that are wild gathering as well. It's very important for our branch. There are species disappearing. So I wanted to know how your group worked on the question of gathering, picking and gathering. I don't have many elements on this subject. But in the selection of ingredients that we carried out, ingredients that are from the plant world, we know that when a plant has come from picking and gathering, we ask for certain elements to make sure that this was responsible picking, responsible gathering, and that it was sustainable. And without any elements to prove that this is the case, this will be a criteria which blocks the purchase. And we have very few of them at the moment, so we can go right to the source, so we can actually go and see how people pick and gather their material. And a question for Mr. Complexity. I've forgotten your name, Francois. It was very interesting to hear you. However, I am a producer, I think there's an accumulation of a great many ratings, etc. And you know, how can you find your feet in all of this? It's beginning to be quite difficult to have beauty score, organic, CSR, all these different scores were being rated constantly. You know, are we worried too much about the rating of the school rather than focusing on what we do? Well, the schools was presented by engineers who worked in food science. We want to do something very simple. When you get into a cycle of living things, it's very difficult to measure, of course. However, the real power of a farmer is, you know, the land, how he uses the land. The first year, you're going to perhaps spend 4 hours working on the score that you have to produce. You're going to spend an hour and a half perhaps talking about your different crops. And then you've got 2.5 hours where you have to map your hedges. And that takes time. However, this score has to be done every year. People who do it every 3 or 5 years, you could do that as well. But if you do it every year, it really allows you to measure. And when you photograph the first year, it doesn't really change that much. So the first year, it's 4 years, and the second, third, fourth year, well, it's really 1 hour per year, and it's free. I like it because I am taking responsibility as a producer. The score says you've got a complex or a non-complex element, but it's up to you to how you understand and manage complexity through the IEs and everything else. It's really up to me. I want to change the size of pearls. I want to change my crop cover. I want to change my interrupts, whatever. You know, I have to be open. I thought I was very open. And ecology who comes to tell me what I want to do, I should be doing on my farm annoys me. But, you know, he will tell me to put a hedge somewhere, but he doesn't realize that all year I'm going to road in my tractor and I'm going to get the branches caught in my tractor. However, if I decide to do it, that's different, isn't it? This is a question for Benjamin and François, perhaps. In your project, you have applied any protocol for counting biodiversity with the farmers? And did you see if there was a demand for the branch? Because biodiversity is extremely important for our future in the pack, in the CAP. And so I'd like to hear your experience. Well, I talked about projects in hops, etc., where there's real monitoring of the pests, etc. In other projects, we don't have such surveillance, or rarely anyway, and not in a very significant fashion. But you could have it in agroforestry, for example, PAM. It wasn't iteipmai who carried this out. It was, we can see we were looking about the trees and in the palms, etc., and the maps to see if there's an interaction between groups. But in the current project, where we have different ratings for biodiversity, there's a program tomorrow where we don't really have any indicators specifically devoted to biodiversity, but it would be very interesting to do so, obviously. Can I just add something? This scoring system is very young. It's a young tool. It's new. And ITAP is using it, and it's going to improve the tool for us, this biodiversity score. And when you look at the number of farms using it, well, it's really the technicians who are helping producers in order to do their biodiversity score, in order to have full information between the agricultural practices, between the farmer who knows his practices, and the result of the biodiversity score. Now we have to obviously go and look at specialists in order to go further, perhaps to map the farms where you can see a high score and see the correlation level with precise counting, with precise figures. The biodiversity score, do you talk about biodiversity in the soil and out with the soil, for example, earthworms? No measures, 0 measures. That's why you do it in 4 hours in the first year and 1 hour thereafter. I'm sorry, I'm monopolizing the microphone. So what are you looking at? Are you looking at all of the biodiversity in one particular parcel? Because we're actually forgetting a certain part of biodiversity in the tool. That's just a personal comment. Well, I think I'll send you the appropriate documents. And may I come back on something when we're talking about direct measures? As I said in my presentation, these are things that are possible, but which depend on climate conditions, on the season, on the time of year, and following the changes with practices. If you've got a T0 and then you take a measure 3 years later, if you have the same conditions, you're going to see an evolution. If you don't have the same conditions, in 1 year you had rain, and in 1 year it was sunny, you're not going to have the same results. The results are going to be better with the sun, but they're not going to really be a real reflection of the evolution. You have to bear that in mind. The results have got certain nuances. It is a result, of course, when you're measuring change over time, or else you'd have to really take these measures very, very regular in order to have a more accurate reading.
C'est ça. Enfin, en tout cas, je rebondis, c'est exactement ça. L'idée aussi du biodiversity score, c'est on sait qu'un agriculteur, quand il met une haie,
an agriculture, when he reduces his parcel size, when he puts in IEEs, these are structural elements, and that can be measured over time, the use and the impacts. And you can have some surprises. If the hedges are present or not, you might have a surprise. Okay, well, wanted to conclude then. I'd like to thank all of the participants. I bear in mind some keywords, complexity being one of them. Complexity, why? Because it's pluridisciplinary. We talked about ecology, we talk about botanics, genetics, we've talked about ornithology, landscape. See, assessing biodiversity means that you have to really call on all our skills. I know that we must have elements for measuring and scoring, and I know that there is a need to work across the value chain, on the whole value chain, not just a farmer. You have to go from beginning to end, and Stéphanie's comments echo that. You have to have interprofessional projects which make sure that all people are around the table. So thank you to you all. That's the end of the round table. So I would like you to go back to your seats, and we're going to move on to the next presentations.